Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where or when you watch this. Welcome to the Yale School of International Affairs at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., and to the Envisioning India virtual event series. My name is Remi Jedwab. I'm the Director of Institute for International Economic Policy, or IIEP, as we like to call it, and an Associate Professor of Economics and International Affairs. I'm delighted to welcome you to a great lineup of speakers and discussants to learn more about the theme of the event. In a moment, I will turn the podium over to my colleague at IIEP, Ajay Chhibber. But first, I want to thank IIEP and our executive circle of supporters for helping make today's event possible, and to our IIEP staff for the support of the conference. For those of you who don't know us, IIEP is located here at the Elliott School, and we're a cross-school interdisciplinary research center. We aim to serve as a catalyst for high-quality research on policy issues surrounding economic globalization. And that is a mandate that we interpret rather broadly. So this includes trade, international finance, development economics, poverty studies, climate change, and economic policy more broadly. We have had quite a focus on both China's economy and India's economy over the past few years. We have been very busy at IIEP over the last 2 years with over 175 events that you can find on our website. We have a number of upcoming events, and our older events can be found on our YouTube channel at IIEP GW. So we'll put the link in the chat. And it is now my pleasure to turn over the podium to Ajay. Thanks a lot. Ajay is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Remi, and welcome to all of you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. So this is the 18th sort of episode or event of the Envisioning India series. All previous events videos are available on our websites. Today we have a very interesting session. Just as there was so much euphoria about India, comes what I would call a cold shower or a sobering shower from Ashoka Mody with his new book. It's called, with the catchy title, India is Broken and Why It's Hard to Fix. This is the book. Ashoka is now teaching at Princeton University at the Woodrow Wilson School. He's been at the IMF. He was a colleague of mine also at the World Bank, and he's had many distinguished positions and written many different books. So we are in for a treat or a tour de force of his view on where India stands today and why it's so hard to fix going forward. We have two very distinguished panelists today with us also. We have Sadanand Dhume, who's the Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He, in my view, writes the best column these days that I read on India in the Wall Street Journal. And he's also had a very distinguished career before that at the Asia Society, at the Far Eastern Economic Review. So excellent writer himself. Then we have Ambassador Germany Bhagwati. He's now a distinguished fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Policy in India. He has been India's ambassador in the European Union, as well as High Commissioner in London. But he's also, it doesn't mention that on his bio that you can read more about him, but he's also written a very interesting book, The Promise of India, which takes India from the time of Jawaharlal Nehru all the way to Modi, just like Ashoka Mody's book does. So it's great to have you, Germany, as well. So without much further ado, let me turn it over to Professor Ashoka Mody to start for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll go to the discussions. Over to you, Ashoka.
Okay, thank you very much, Ajay, and thank you very much also, Germany and Sadanand, for agreeing to discuss the book. What you see before you are two different covers. The left is the India edition, which Ajay also showed, and the right is the international edition. As Ajay pointed out, this is a moment when there is Indian elite is in a very exuberant mood. And that exuberance is being echoed in the international media and by the international elite. My book, 4 Years in the Making, is a history from 1947 to the present. And it tells a very different story, but in a way, it is a plea, it is a cry to say that for far too long, India has been barreling down a perilous path. I depart from the convention of using GDP growth as a metric of human progress and welfare. Instead, I focus on what I call the elusive search for jobs. President Biden, in his recent State of the Union address, used the word jobs 45 times. I don't remember him using GDP growth in his remarks. Jobs is where the lived reality of people is. And Indian cinema has for long commented on that lived reality.
यानी कि काम ना काम ही की तलाश में तो मैं इलाहाबाद से यहाँ चल कर आया हूँ। क्यों भाई, तुम्हारे शहर में पेट भरने के लिए क्या करना चाहिए? जो मैं करता हूँ, भीख मांगनी चाहिए। नहीं, कोई काम बताओ मुझे, काम बताओ। तो सोचना पड़ेगा।
This is the iconic movie Shri 420 in 1954. 44 years later, another iconic movie, Satya. Another migrant, the same question.
कुछ काम मिलेगा?
कुछ भी चलेगा तेरे को?
So the question I ask is, if this is the lived reality, why is this the case? And my answer is that India has been continuously losing what I call the Red Queen race. Other countries have gone faster ahead for two main reasons. India does not invest in human capital, and it does not treat its women well. So I'm going to show you a number of charts, but this is one chart I would like you to remember. This is the share of manufactured goods in share of exports, global manufactured exports. So you notice over here that in 1948, India was actually slightly above Japan. That is misleading because Japan was coming out of the war, a disrupted phase, but Japan then soon raced ahead. But then sometime in the late 60s, early 70s, Korea, Taiwan began to race ahead of India. And then you will notice that towards the end, starting around 2010, Indian share flattens out at just under 2%. And Vietnam, which is a country of 100 million people, has essentially caught up by 2020 and is poised to go ahead. The factors that lie behind it, I focus a lot on female primary education. And you will see over here the school enrollment data, again, going back a long time, Taiwan, Korea, China, the sequence of entry into global markets is mirrored very closely by the education of girls. India has finally got a primary enrollment rate of 100% sometime in the late 90s. But India then has now a severe learning problem. In other words, while kids go to school, the quality of education they receive is extremely poor. This is from a series of surveys that are done every other year or so. You see here two states, Tamil Nadu and Bihar, 5th grade children unable to read 2nd grade text, 5th grade children unable to do division. India is competing in a global market where other kids are being much better educated. So this is these are test results for Vietnam. People have questioned the Vietnamese results, but nevertheless, you can see the hierarchy over here. Vietnam in the PISA test, which is an international test for 15-year-olds done worldwide, 2015. This is a 2015 result. Vietnam does better than France in science and matches France in mathematics. Relatively equitable distribution on the right-hand side of education. The same sequence you see, the East Asians have done well because they have extremely high labor force participation. Again, Vietnam, China, Korea somewhat less, but still very high. India, if you notice over here, has actually come down over time. Now, the government of India has recently, and its spokesman have tried to throw dust on this data, but I have persuaded myself based on the work of Ajit Ghosh, who regrettably recently passed away, and recent commentary by Rohini Pandey, that these are basically sound numbers that tell you the hierarchy of female labor force participation. In India, it's been declining in large part because of agricultural mechanization and urban violence against women. India is going through a phase of technological giddiness. That technology is going to solve all our problems. I would almost call it a fetishism. So here is one important indicator why technology does not substitute for human beings. This guy you see in front of you is Sal Khan. He's the world's most important practitioner as the founder of Sal Academy of online learning. Here is what Sal Khan has to say about technology.
When Khan Academy is used best, it's used inside of a classroom with people next to each other. Students are able to work at their own pace on things that are relevant to them. The teacher is able to walk around and have more personal one-on-one interaction, actually more human-to-human interaction than they would get in a traditional lecture-based classroom.
This is the key, that the teacher is an essential component, and the Indian failure essentially is at the level of poor quality teaching. To be clear, India has done well in a couple of areas, the most important of which is software exports, which I call here computer and information services because it's a broader category. India did well till about 2009, 2010. But since then, the competition there too has heated and Indian share has come down. On the right, you see pharmaceuticals. Again, India has about 2.5–3% share of global markets. But from about 2013 or the year 2013, that share has been flattening out, in large part because the Food and Drug Administration has been taking a keener look at Indian manufacturing practices and adulterated drugs. Again, China is catching up, just as in software. Chinese catching up in software should not be a surprise. China has some of the best universities in mathematics and computer sciences. The question of English as an advantage for India is a long-dated idea. So if India has not done well in the global market, especially of manufactured exports, where has Indian GDP growth come from? And the central point is that it has come from finance and construction. That has an important consequence. They are poor job creation and, more importantly, an erosion of social norms and public accountability. So you see on this chart, this is the other chart I would like you to remember. When people say India has had a services-led growth, the service that has led the growth is finance and real estate. When I showed this chart in class, a student of mine asked me, where is IT? And then he answered his question himself. He said, it's too small. It doesn't show up on this chart. It is so little. Manufacturing, as you see, has declined somewhat and has not recovered its share at that it had attained in the mid-80s, which is the start of the so-called liberalization period. The other sector that has grown in GDP is construction, but construction has particularly grown in employment. So this chart is for employment. Again, Tamil Nadu and Bihar. Rural, you see agricultural share coming down, manufacturing staying flat, construction going up. Urban, manufacturing coming down, construction going up. Construction is important. My focus on construction is important because construction is also where the organized crime is. And in the Indian case, aside from the normal organized crime associated with construction in Italy and New York, in the Indian case, there's also sand mining, which is a source today of a prolific number of criminal politicians who are infecting the body politic. On poverty, the first thing to note is that we have not had a survey since 2011-12. It is true that there has been some trickle down. The most dire form of poverty, the $2 line, has come down. Again, you will see other countries, including Bangladesh, have done better. But the $2 poverty line, as the World Bank itself acknowledged recently, about 10 years ago, essentially provides a bare minimum nutrition. And for a country that aspires to a middle income status, it does not meet the social standards and benchmarks that you consider in a civilized society. A $3 line in 2011-12, 60% of Indians were poor. This difference between the $3 and $2 line, I call the zone of vulnerability, the zone of precariousness. Someone in this zone is always at risk of falling into dire poverty through an illness or a job loss or any other catastrophe. On malnutrition, again, you will see that India is improving, but at a slower rate than other countries. Notice that China and Vietnam and all major Latin American countries have eliminated both extreme poverty as well as precariousness. There was a 2018-19 survey on poverty, which the government quickly dismissed as showing a very bleak picture. I've never heard a good explanation why it showed a bleak picture. It did show a bleak picture, and why it was dismissed. Because it showed that poverty had actually gone up in 2018-19. And certainly it has gone up again after COVID. In the meantime, and this is now a very sort of topical theme, inequalities have increased. So this chart shows the stock price of Adani Enterprises since about May 2014, when Narendra Modi flew with Gautam Adani in his private jet from Ahmedabad to Delhi. As I say in the book, Gautam Adani's stock price took off with the flight trajectory on which he was ferrying the Prime Minister. The central theme of the book then is that we have had a series of moral failures. I deliberately do not give any particular policy prescription, because I say the fundamental problem is the erosion of social norms and accountability. And unaccountable politicians do not impose accountability on themselves. I'll just run through a few of these. The first is a broken judicial system. You will see here, these are the number of cases awaiting trial. Many people are in Indian jails, waiting trial for periods longer than the sentence they would have served if they had been convicted of the crime they were alleged to have convicted. This is the share of legislators charged with serious crimes. A serious crime includes assault, murder, kidnapping, and rape. You will see here that that share has steadily increased. About half the legislators in the Bihar Assembly have serious crime allegations against them. Tamil Nadu, unfortunately, is becoming more like Bihar over time, somewhat better, but on an increasing trajectory. These are the Indian data. On the left-hand side, you see election expenditures. The black bar is India. India in 2009 was somewhat lower than America in 2008, which is the nearest president election in the United States, which combines both the presidential and the congressional election. Over time, you see the black bar, India in 2019 now is higher than the US in 2016, which is the last comparable election in the US. So Indian election expenditures have exploded. On the right, you see the share of legislators in the national parliament, the Lok Sabha, who have been accused of serious crimes. And that number now stands at 25%. Just have to pause for a second that 25% of legislators, parliamentarians in India have been charged with serious crimes. The most serious moral failure is in the environment. There's a notion that economic development should pay no regard to environment. This is a description of the river Musi that runs through Hyderabad. Hyderabad is the pharma capital of India, and the river Musi has essentially died as the pharmaceutical companies dump their waste in the river.
So this is coming from the factories down there?
Factories. And that is upstream?
And they dump it in the river?
Yeah.
And where do you take the samples?
I think the samples there also.
Yeah, it worked also on my eyes. The foam is then from the pollution.
Yeah, pollution.
And this is the river Ganga. So the river Ganga has been beautified in certain corridors. This picture taken a few days, this video taken a few days ago is from proximity of the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. Just go beyond the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. Here are 4 rivers. The one on the left is the river Asi, which gives Varanasi half its name. The river Asi, when I was growing up as a child, was a river. Today, the residents of Banaras call it the Asi Nala, which is the Asi drain. The river on the right is Noyal, where again you see the chemical foam. This is near Tirupur, the garment town. This is again the dyes and other chemicals being dumped into the river. The Sabarmati and the Yamuna, people recognize. Finally, just on COVID, I'm not going to talk about the health aspects of COVID so much, but what COVID revealed. It revealed a distressed agriculture from which people are trying to flee to urban jobs. But urban jobs are both scarce and fragile. And it also demonstrated the huge inequalities in the system. So this clip is from a movie called Dharti Ke Lal in 1946, depicting the Bengal famine. The key point over here is the reverse trek. People fled the famine, went to the Calcutta, disheartened by their experience in Calcutta, are going back to the villages. And this is the reverse trek after COVID.
Dejected and desperate to be united with families, they grabbed at any opportunity that came their way. A few bought second-hand bicycles with the last of their money to pedal home 1,000 kilometers away.
So you see again over here the same phenomenon. You can see the progress. There are better clothed people, more cycles, but the essential distress of agriculture and the scarce urban jobs remains. The health spending, either in per capita terms or in hospital beds, you can see India is in the left-hand corner. And here are the exploding inequalities. This chart starts after the inception of COVID. And you can see over here the Adani stock price rise, and you have also seen recently the fall. So I end by asking the question, is the jobs challenge insurmountable? And in 2019, the Indian Railways promised to employ 35,000 people. 12.5 million people applied for 35,000 jobs. In other words, for every one person who would eventually get a job, 350 would not get jobs. And in January 2020, the railway said, oops, sorry, we are not even ready to give you those 35,000 jobs. We'll go through another round of screening, upon which this is what happened.
Burning trains, protest on tracks, lathi charge and tear gas shelling. For over 48 hours now, a raging battle is on between railway exam students and the government.
So this is my last slide. By my calculation, India needs 200 million jobs over the next decade to fully employ its working age population. In the last decade, there was no net addition to jobs. Very likely there were fewer people employed in 2022 than in 2012. And besides all the handicaps that I've described to you already, there are new handicaps: dying rivers, a broadly degraded environment, and the climate crisis is here. Heat waves, erosion of coasts, the melting of glaciers, everything is here that is going to impinge further on lives and livelihoods. So I'll stop here. My book promised a grim story. I believe I have delivered on that grim story. I'm happy to hear my discussants and share in a broader discussion.
Thank you very much, Ashoka. Yeah, that was a very vivid description of some of the bigger challenges and problems that you point out, and you did it so wonderfully with visuals as well, which made it all come alive. I'm going to now turn it over to the two distinguished discussants. But in the meantime, may I request people also in the audience to get themselves ready for the Q&A session that will follow. And if you want, you can also start posting your questions on the chat site that I will be picking up later and relaying back to Ashoka and to the two panelists. So let me turn now to Sadanand. Sadanand, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ajay. Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished series, and also to Professor Jedwab. And I have to say that what GW has done with IIEP is really create, I would argue, the most interesting and sophisticated site for discussing the Indian economy. And I would sort of urge people who are watching to not just watch this one, but to go back and watch some of the other discussions. And so I want to say thank you first for that. And I also want to start by praising Professor Mody for this book. I mean, I think this is obviously a book of deep scholarship. It's written with great erudition, it's written with great compassion, but it's also written at this moment in time with a great deal of courage. I would not be surprised if at this very moment you have some enterprising youth and some in the IT cell digging up connections between all of the panelists and George Soros to discredit his arguments. And I say this only half in jest. The reality is that we are living at a moment where questioning the so-called India shining narrative or questioning the India story is not seen merely as an act of intellectual skepticism, but is seen as an act of treachery. So I think that it sort of, under these circumstances, against this backdrop, it takes a certain amount of courage to write the book that Professor Mody has written, and I want to laud him and applaud him for that. I think the sort of the picture that Professor Mody has drawn in his presentation is quite irrefutable if what you're looking at is a snapshot of the present moment. There is no question that India has a very large proportion of its workforce, about 40%, still employed in agriculture. In China, I think it's roughly 20 to 25%. In the US, it's only 2%. There's no question that India has a much smaller percentage of its women in the workforce, not just then compared to the developed world, but even compared to its peers in developing countries. There's no question that the jobs figure that we see over and over, which is that India needs to create 1 million new jobs every month, never seems to be met. And the kinds of stories that Professor Mody shared about, people, thousands of people or tens of thousands of people applying for menial jobs, whether it's in the railways or whether it's to work as a waiter in the Maharashtra state government cafeteria and so on. I mean, you can just you could do a whole book just with those, just with those stories. There's no question that as her surveys show, India is getting many more students into school, the literacy and rates and the standard of education remains wanting. My favorite anecdote on that one is that a few years ago, when India appeared in ASER, it essentially picked 2 of the states that are regarded as the most advanced, if memory serves, Himachal and Tamil Nadu. And at the time, they ended up coming last or second last, depending on whether you're looking at math and literacy. And after which, of course, India immediately pulled the plug and left the international survey. I believe they've decided to go back since. So it would be interesting to see where India stands now in terms of education. And it's also certainly true that if you look at things like the pending cases before the judiciary, the judiciary has effectively become dysfunctional in several ways. I would add to that the fact that very often now you find that the Indian judiciary seems unable to, the highest court, even the Supreme Court, seems unable to grapple with the most important constitutional questions. So for example, in 2019, when Article 370 was revoked in Kashmir, the Supreme Court 4 years later has still not heard whether that action was constitutional or not. Now, you could have any view on that as a political matter. You could think that it was the best decision in the world, or you could think it was the worst decision in the world. That's not my point. But I think it was clearly a constitutional question, and the fact that the highest court in the land has not been able to grapple with that does say something quite telling about the state of the judiciary. So there's my agreement with Professor Mody, that he has painted this very compelling, shall we say, glass half empty portrait. The question, though, that it raises, which I think that, and I think that we don't have a person, ideally you would have someone on the panel who is sort of fully bought into the idea of that India is about to take off and Amrit Kal has arrived and this is India's moment. I am not that person, but I'm going to channel that view just to maybe, sort of push Professor Mody a little bit and sort of out of curiosity about how he would respond to people who would say broadly this, that yes, Professor Mody, you have explained very well why India has not done as well as it ought to have until 2023. But all that is the past. Now is the moment for takeoff. You look at your own charts and you can see that India has lagged East Asia in terms of female education, but now it has very high rates of female enrollment in schools. It has lagged the world, or lagged East Asia in particular, in terms of industrialization. But now the Prime Minister has put in place a program that includes that includes production-linked incentives and higher tariffs on certain items. Apple has opened a factory, or 3 of Apple's contractors have opened factories, and according to JP Morgan, 25% of iPhones may soon be manufactured in India. People, there's a school of thought, particularly on the sort of on the right of the spectrum, which I somewhat derisively refer to as the Gorakhpur equals Singapore school. But they argue seriously, according to them, that if you look, for example, at the very high population concentration in places like Eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, they mirror the very high concentration of populations in places like Hong Kong and Amsterdam. And all you need is the right sort of magical mix of infrastructure and improving education and better administration, and prosperity is going to be generated very rapidly over many, many decades to come. You see these stories, these are commonplace, and I would say not just among the elites. I think that this is a narrative that a very large proportion of India's middle class has bought into. So my question really is that how do you respond to a person who says, yes, you've explained very well how we've got to where we are today, but you have not explained why now, in this magical time of great decisive political leadership, things are about to take a very dramatic change for the better. So that's my first question. My second question is really on the issue of morality, which I am really glad that Professor Mody dwells on this, because these kinds of books, very often they sort of avoid that because it's harder to quantify. But the question really that I wrestle with on this is that, you're absolutely right, as you point out, that there's been a kind of decline in the quality of public life, right? And I think, you talk about how this kicks in as early as the 1930s, right? In the late 1930s, you can sort of, you have press accounts of corruption rising in government and so on. Gurcharan Das has written about this, about sort of, very early on after independence, that you could sort of see some of this. And now, of course, some of the data you've shown and Milan Vaishnav's work has shown that the kind of nexus between crime and politics has become stronger. But, in US politics, we often talk about politics being downstream from culture. So my question there is, I think it's very easy for us to blame the political class, or even to blame, as Professor Mody does, a kind of sort of disconnected, deracinated elite who sort of live first world lives. But if politics really is downstream from culture, then to what extent do we need to look more closely at the culture that has produced the politics that Professor Mody bemoans? I think my 10 minutes must be more or less up, so I'm going to leave it at that, and I look forward to discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Sadanand. And so, Ashoka, just hold on for before you answer those two questions posed by Sadanand, but because we'd first like to hear from Ambassador Jaimini Bhagwati, and then we can come back to you for a response, if you like. So over to you, Jaimini.
Okay, sorry. So thank you, Ajay, and thank you, Ashoka Mody and Sadanand Dhume, for your comments and this opportunity, Ajay, to speak about this interesting book. I think it's a formidable collection of facts and figures, and India's evolution using the periods of each prime minister and so on. Some other books, as you mentioned at the beginning, not just mine, others have also adopted this model. Mine came out in August 2019. And to some extent, therefore, this is a little bit of deja vu. But having said that, I think we need to take things in perspective. I think the author begins with 1947 as if India always existed like this in the past. There was no India before 1947. There was a colonial India. And we don't need to necessarily agree with every person who says how much by way of wealth the British extracted out from India. But it's a fact of life that, everybody knows that colonial masters do impoverish their colonies in various ways. The Belgians did it, of course, in a very ghastly way in Congo. The British were much better compared to the Belgians in Congo. But in terms of a country with a political capital in Delhi and with the kind of command and control with armed forces and the police and the intelligence bureau, the British set up, never existed, not even under the Mughals, not under Ashoka, not under anyone. So this is a new country which has just emerged in 1947. And I don't think people, I don't know whether our American friends here fully internalize that we have at least 10 scripts, distinct scripts. So French and English and German and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese are all in the same Roman script, but we have different scripts. I can't read Tamil. But having said that, by the way, before I continue in this way, I must say that I am not over thrilled with the situation in India. I recognize that there are tremendous disparities. There is tremendous injustice. Many of our pillars of democracy are not functioning the way they should. But think I think there's a line in Ashoka Mody's book where he talks about the Meiji Restoration in Japan in 1868. So I think our restoration started in 1947. We had 12% literacy. And I think in the average life expectancy was somewhere around 32. I mean, don't hold me to these numbers. I'm just trying to remember whatever I've read here and there. So now, even under the British, the princely states were different. We had to, I mean, again, some of our neighboring countries might not agree with us in terms of how those princely states were incorporated into India. But it was not easy. Then we had language riots. One person said that, he's going to fast to death. I'm not going to get into those details. So when we find fault with Nehru, and we should, but I think on the foreign policy side, not in the development side, and when we talk about health and education not being where they are, not 99%. I agree 100% with the author. More should have been done, but just one or two factoids. Education was a state subject under the Constitution, and it became a concurrent subject in 1976. So this constant harping on Nehru being an elitist and not doing enough for primary education, I think, shows a certain lack of awareness of some facts. Health is a concurrent subject. I'm not even sure that it was a concurrent subject right to begin with. So what were the state chief ministers doing? What were the state chief secretaries doing? What were the deputy commissioners doing? So, this business of focusing only on the prime minister may sometimes give us a distorted understanding about the country. And I would like to add that when we look left, right, meaning east, west, north, south, despite our multiple failures and continuing shortcomings, India is despite the emergency between 75 and 77, and whatever you might say about the current government, for instance, I feel that this business of going and surveying the BBC's tax records, I think is completely something that I find very strange. And I can't understand what the government is up to. Despite all that, there is no country to our north, south, east, west, I'm not going so far south as Australia and New Zealand, which has had a continuous democratic setup, both at the center and in the states. Yes, some states were dismissed once by when Nehru was in power, and many times when Indira Gandhi was in power. And right now, the central government is harassing various state governments and so on and so forth. But we are not turned into an autocracy. We are not a military dictatorship. And I might add that, the lack of foreign policy perspective in the book is glaring to the point that it distorts matters. To our immediate west, Pakistan, under the various military dictatorships, I'm sure my US friends here know very well. They can read Bruce Riedel's book if they don't know it already. somebody who has a lot of knowledge about the CIA, that close to Peshawar, there was an air base that the US had, and close to Dhaka, there was an air base. There was something called the Cold War, and we were not seen as the friends of the West. Maybe we were, maybe we were not, but the 95% of our elite chooses to go and study in the West after having done quite well in India in the education, in the higher educational institutions. And the contrast is glaring. There's something dramatically wrong with our primary education in Mufassil and village areas, because as you all know, whether it's Google and whether it is Microsoft and whether it was McKinsey yesterday, etc., these are all first generation Indians, people who have done up to their masters or even their PhDs in India before going abroad and doing so well. The funny thing is that we have no Jagdish Bose in India. We don't have a Bose who is known to be, the boson is named after him. We have no C.V. Raman today. So those are some defects that we definitely have, even in higher education. And in terms of primary health, since Ashoka Mody used some movies, I will remind him, if he has not already seen it, he may like to get hold of it. It's a movie called Anuradha with Balraj Sahni in the lead, and Leela Naidu is his wife, who is from a very rich family. And Balraj Sahni, I think he loses his mother to some illness and decides to go and serve in a village. And then there's a lot of tension between the wife and the husband, because they could have easily lived in an urban area, lived a very comfortable life and brought up their children. But Balraj Sahni's character, I forget what it was, and he went to some place called Nandagaon or something. They have all kinds of problems there. So my counter question is that what did the people who were born in the 1940s and 50s and 60s do in terms of their social and national responsibilities to serve? They didn't, because they thought the job is done, we are independent, that's it, we can move on now. I think that was a big mistake, and I'm including myself because I was born in the 50s. I think there's a detailed reference in the analysis on the economic side does not take into account, for instance, the 62 war with China. It's a big mistake that Nehru made. But we continue to have a border problem with China even today. We live in a difficult neighborhood. And the founding fathers, they concentrated so much power in Delhi because they were worried of India breaking up. But the flip side of that coin is that despite the Panchayati Raj legislation of 1993, 4, something like that, during Narasimha Rao's time, although the work was done when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, we don't have the effective decentralization below the state governments. So to some extent, I would blame this lack of decentralization rather than person X or person Y. I would say that this, how do I put it, I'm sorry to say it's a little bit like a drain inspector's report, what Gandhi had to say about Catherine Mayo's book called Mother India. So if you look in a drain, you only see the refuse. But having said that, I agree with a lot of what has been said in the book. But far too much attention has been paid, I think, on what is wrong in India for a country which is just whatever it is, 75 plus years old. So I would say that, a lot has been done in terms of self-sufficiency in food grains, vegetables, fruits, milk. We all know about Operation Flood. We all know about Mr. Kurian. I remember a time, I'm from Assam, so if I went to Tejpur and it's very difficult to get fresh milk. And I'm talking about 1980s. We're not talking about, 100 years ago. But today, in terms of basic food, but again, I will agree, I'm sure the author feels, and I would agree that in terms of protein intake, in terms of balanced meals, but there are these midday meals, the breakfast in various states. I agree with him. I was appalled to see some analysts said 80 million people had to walk back to villages during the COVID time. I do not believe the government statistics that only less than 1 million people died during COVID. I guess, I don't know, maybe 5 million died. But, there's much less noise made about the number of Indians, children who die of tuberculosis, and the number there is far higher. So the failure in public health is well known. I would say that don't underestimate the divisions and the differences in the country. It's not just the British who exploited us. Somewhere around the late 18th century, there were these widespread violence and pillage by Maratha bands as far away as Bengal. In fact, I think mothers there would try to shush their children and say, I forget what was the word used for these Maratha raiders who came on horseback, basically to say, so-and-so will come and pick you up and take you away. And there's the famous, I think, Kolkata ditch that we know about that the British dug against the Marathas. So we've had these divisions for a long time. The very fact that we are still one country, despite, within inverted commas, the good wishes of people like Winston Churchill, who said, what, India? What is that? India is just a line on a map. Is the Tropic of Cancer or the Tropic of Capricorn a country? Very frankly, I can see where he is coming from, given our history. So I would not be so negative at this stage. I would still say that the glass is perhaps only 25% full, maybe less. It all depends on how you define what is full, maybe 20% full. But in another, think of us in 1990s, the reforms, whether you attribute that to Narasimha Rao or to some economist, I would attribute 90% of it to Narasimha Rao taking the risk because he was running a coalition government. It was a minority government. But think of 1992, 93, it is now 30 years, 2023. I think even the harshest critic of India will say, even for the person at the bottom of the economic ladder, things are not so bad. So I would posit that in another 30 years, you young people will still be around. I don't think I will be. In 2053, there'll be another sea change for the better. As long as we can implement at least 30, 35, 40% of the policies that are on paper. So that I completely agree with Ashoka Mody, that far too much is spoken about, it's on paper, but doesn't get implemented. Lastly, I would say, and this may sound harsh to Ashoka Mody, but it's just a phrase which popped into my mind. A lot of the book, I get the sense that these are the views of an embittered, rejected lover, from somebody who actually loves the country, but there's a certain amount of rejection of the country, of people like him. And so particularly the sharp criticism of Nehru at various places, as I've mentioned, many of the things that he achieved, he does not think that GDP is important. I agree with him that distribution of growth is equally, but without growth, you can't have any distribution. So that's in fact some of the things that the Soviet Union learned, and to its cost as it broke up. If you only distribute without growth, then you run the risk of breaking up. So, but between 1900 and 1947, the average rate of GDP growth was about 0.8%. Between 1947, after the war, where various industries in the UK were being nationalized, between 1947 till Nehru died in 64, and I don't want to get into more details, the average rate of growth was the Hindu rate of growth. Nothing wrong with the Hindu rate of growth at that time of 3%. So if you jump from 0.8 to 3%, I think you did reasonably well. And now we can keep quibbling. Are we growing at 6%? Will we grow at 7% next year or whatever? There are many slips betwixt cup and lip, and India may still come a cropper. But I would put my money on India if I were a betting man, but not on Adani stocks. Thank you. Thank you for your patience in listening to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Remi. And so I do have a number of questions in the chat box, etc. also. But before I go there, I want to go back to Professor Ashoka Mody. There's a saying about the famous Cambridge economist Joan Robinson is attributed to saying, everything about India and its opposite is also true. So we have a bit of that, but let me give it back to you, Ashoka, to respond to Sadanand and Jaimini. The main thing being is your story is partially correct, but then there are more positive aspects which you have not picked up on. There's the question of, yes, there were problems in the past, but are we at a moment where things could get better? The whole issue of foreign policy and how, and sort of the entity of India or the idea of India and how that has played and shaped, domestic policy. And then the whole issue of morality, politics, and culture. Those are 3-4 buckets that I'll throw back at you.
Yeah,
and then
thank you very
come back
much.
to the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ajay. And let me just say to Jaimini, I am in complete agreement with you that we should celebrate the fact that India is not a military autocracy. So I'll focus my responses to Sadanand because he raised some important questions. His main question, which is a legitimate one, and is, okay, particularly since he has been so gracious as to the analysis of the present, maybe we are at the cusp of greatness. That there is a momentum here which is placing us at the cusp of greatness. That's the storyline today. And I have 2 or 3 responses to that. I try to deal with that in the epilogue. And this is a good moment to elaborate on that. In a way, Sadanand, your 2 questions about the economy and morality are related in my mind. Are related in the sense that without an underpinning of morality, the ability to move ahead on economic progress is also limited. Okay, what do I mean by that? The purpose of writing the history, as distinct from just a stock taking of today, is to say that the erosion of social norms and accountability has occurred over a very long period of time. And it has descended into what I call a bad equilibrium. A bad equilibrium is a state where unaccountable politicians do not impose accountability on themselves. Just yesterday, the Supreme Court decision uses somewhat slightly different words to say the same thing, that the problem is that the entire structure has become such that the notion of creating accountability has become one which is almost quaint. So I'll give you one example and then I'll try to address your specific questions more directly. I did a search in Factiva with 3 words: Ghazipur, landfill, and fire. For those of you who don't know Ghazipur, there's a landfill just outside Delhi. And that landfill has grown into a garbage mountain and it periodically catches fire. And the question I was asking was, when did these 3 words appear for the first time in international database? And the answer is they appeared in 1992. It's a Reuters story in 1992. You can take that paragraph and put it in a report in 2022, and you will not know the difference. In other words, for the last 30 years, we've known that the Ghazipur landfill catches fire. We have had multiple efforts to try to bring down that garbage mountain, multiple technologies that have been brought in. And yet, after every such effort, the mountain keeps growing back. You can do the same for the Yamuna cleaning process. You can do the same for the Ganga cleaning process, for that matter. On education, for example, I agree with you that the enrollment has increased. There's no question about it, that primary enrollment has increased, has reached 100% more or less. That said, the lack of education quality has two implications. One, that as kids grow older, they get more frustrated because the gap between their grade level and their standards becomes larger. By 9th grade, something like 30% of the kids drop out of school. Those who do continue through school go to rubbish colleges, which are proliferating based on politicians and notables who almost mafia-like run these colleges, preying on kids who want certificates. The point of the Red Queen metaphor is that the world does not stand still. What was appropriate in the context of primary education in the 40s and 50s becomes required in terms of secondary education, becomes required in terms of higher quality education as we make progress. In other words, the rest of the world is now going well beyond the sort of basic requirements that in the 80s were considered appropriate. Therefore, my concern is that if the social norms and accountability remain eroded, the willingness and ability to change course remains compromised, especially in this context where the media and the institutions of checks and balances, like the Supreme Court, are compromised in ways that you yourself have just described. The further point that makes me pessimistic is the degradation of the environment. The degradation of the environment is not something that is typically a part of a macroeconomic text. I have made it a central theme in my book because the notion that you can grow at the expense of the environment is both wrong economics and it is wrong in terms of social justice. It is a fundamental problem that it is the core of the lack of morality. It is the core of the lack of morality because it is ignoring the voice of the next generation who has no voice in the system today. The dying rivers that I've shown you in my slides is a pervasive phenomenon around the country. The dying rivers, when rivers die, civilizations die. And so the notion that we can somehow escape the fate that we have created for ourselves is a very attractive one. And my counter to that is there is no technological wand that is going to clean the rivers. There is no technological wand that is going to educate the kids. There is no technology that is going to reverse the violence against women in private and public spaces. Those are the fundamental aspects of economic development, which we need to grapple with directly rather than through some hope that industrial policy and technology will deal with that.
Right.
I'll just say one last thing, Ajay, because he raised a very important question on the Apple, the Apple investment in India. On the Apple investment, if you look at the data, the premise is that because China is going to reduce its manufacturing base, some of that will come to India, or a significant part will come to India. The Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan report that you cited is a prediction. But what does the data tell us? The data tells us three things. Some of what is happening in China was a COVID phenomenon. China is re-emerging. Some of the Chinese production is moving from its coast into China. China is so solidly established because of its supply chains, it is very difficult to move out of China, number one. Number two, American manufacturers who are moving out of China are moving to Mexico. That is much cleaner for them, much easier for them than to source from India. And the third is that Vietnam is taking a lot of that space. If you look in the data, other than the Apple investment that we keep hearing about, there is very little evidence that there is a movement out of China into India. Therefore, while an attractive anecdote, a useful anecdote, it still remains an anecdote.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, in today's FT, Alan Beatty has an article on this as well. But just to come back to the questions, and Germany and Sadanand, I give you a chance also to comment on these if you like. But there are now several questions in the chat box. Let me throw three of them out. I'll throw them out in batches if you like, because I don't want to put all 9, 10 of them out there. The first question is actually from Remi Jedwab. So he says, why are you viewing construction so negatively? After all, it's a country that needs a lot more housing, needs a lot more infrastructure. So why is the growth of the construction sector seen by you, painted by you in this particularly negative manner? Then there's a question which I will broaden a little bit, which says that, basically there have been course corrections in a democratic setup. We have seen grimmer times in the past, and the country has course corrected many times. Germany cited the example of course, the reforms in '91, but before that, if you remember, we had worse times during the emergency, etc. So, and what among the political parties, one of the questioners cites the IIEP party as a positive delivery party that actually delivers. So, do you have any views on that? And then there's a question about broader question about the statistical quality of information in India, which is, if you want to opine on that a little bit as to what that tells us about what's going on. So these are three questions I'll throw back at you, and then after you respond, I'll offer Germany and Sadanand also to comment on them if they like.
So look,
Ajay,
yeah, go ahead.
Ajay, if you don't mind, I'll need to leave. It's about 8:45 here in the evening. So with your permission and with I'll say goodbye now, and we'll leave the floor to Ashoka, Mody, and to Mr. Sadanand Dhume. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for this opportunity to participate in this discussion. But as I said, it's getting late and somebody is waiting for me, so I need to leave.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Germany.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Okay. Ashoka.
On the construction, so look, clearly construction has been important, and construction has been important not just in terms of economic activity, but important in terms of jobs. It's not a well-known fact, but today, since about 2016, I think, but certainly today, the construction industry employs more people than the manufacturing sector does. I make that comparison largely because what has happened is that the people leaving agriculture have largely come into construction jobs and low-skill service sector jobs. The construction jobs are valuable because they raise the per capita income of people. That is what has moved people from under the $2 line to under the $3 line. That's the transition from dire poverty to precariousness. So yes, it is good because it's an upward movement. I'm not denying that. What I am saying is that along with that mode of development comes a very entrenched, corrupt process, which often spills over into criminality. Is that a negative assessment? I don't know. What I'm saying is that we cannot ignore the fact that there is a mafia associated with construction around the world, whether you look at the Italian mafia or whether you look at the New York mafia. In the Indian case, sand mining. And sand mining is sand is a component that goes along with cement to make concrete. And illegal sand mining today is the largest source of mafia in India. That's a fact. Is that being down on construction? No, look, we need construction, but we need, therefore, a system of checks and balances that deals with these issues. We cannot have construction without recognizing that it is naturally associated with a degree of criminality around the world, in the Indian case, specifically in the context of sand mining. Sand mining is not something that is well known to a general public, especially to a macroeconomic audience, but it is a reality. It is a reality because, as this brilliant journalist Rajshekhar has documented, sand mining then produces politicians who then enter state legislatures. And this is a phenomenon that we have to recognize rather than ducking away from. So that's on the construction side. On the Aam Aadmi Party, look, I was one of the earliest people to see some hope in the Aam Aadmi Party. I think that their clinics, I forget what they're called, Mohalla clinics, I think they're called, yes, are generally considered to have done well. I'm much more skeptical of their claims on schools. My own reading is that the classroom sizes are still hugely large. The teachers are ill-prepared. There is a huge push on the teachers to inflate the grades. So the fact that you're getting much larger pass percentages is part of a process of grade inflation rather than of education quality. Both the Pratham and the NCRT tests showed that Delhi education quality is at best mediocre. And so I am less persuaded on that front. And then I have other question marks on the general political stance of Aam Aadmi, which I think we can ignore for the moment. On the broader question of statistics, it's a scandal. There's no question about it, that a country that claims to be a democracy does not produce timely statistics on poverty, does not produce credible statistics on employment, in fact, throws fake numbers for employment generation through all kinds of dubious numbers which are not connected to any reality. The fact that the 2021 census now has been deferred sine die. So operating in an informational vacuum or an informational fog at the very least, again comes back to Sadanand's question. That is what allows the permission to act in an unaccountable way. And it's the informational fog, in my view, is not just an accident. It's a deliberate part of the strategy, because it then allows you to spin your own story about all the wonderful things that are happening. And the example that he gave of concentrations in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh becoming the next Singapores are just extrapolations of this kind of informational fog. So I think that the informational fog is an endogenous growth of an unaccountable system.
Thank you. So, Sadanand, would you like to say something at this point, or shall I proceed with more questions? Yeah, okay. So then there's some questions also on things like population. Are a lot of these problems due to too much population? What about population control policies? Has India done too much, too little, whatever? I mean, so those are one set of questions. There's another question also. This is from Uri Dardush as to what are, in your view, are the big differences between China and India that have made China so successful? This is a bit of a softball question for you, of course, Ashoka, but I'll put it out there. And then there's a theme of questions sort of saying, in Mr. Mody's, Ashoka Mody's view, has India done anything right? So I'll throw these three back.
Okay, so let me just say, on population, I don't really have a very strong view. I have never been of the view that population is sort of the causal problem. If we had an employment generation machine, that would not have been a problem. Fertility rates have in fact come down recently. So there's always been this question of, are we going to utilize our demographic dividend well? We have certainly used it very poorly. I showed you one video clip of what happens when we don't use that demographic dividend properly. On the question of China, I don't know if, Ajay, you probably were not at the World Bank in 1981. The World Bank undertook its first mission to China in 1981, soon after China became a member. That mission report was written in 81, made public in 1983. And it said three things. That yes, the communist rule has been often very destructive, but it has done three things. And in many of these three things, they made a pointed comparison with India. That it has educated its children, it has provided virtually universal health care, it has alongside nutrition, and third, and this is crucial, it has brought its women into the workforce. So Nick Kristof at the New York Times with his wife, whose name I'm forgetting regrettably, wrote a book called Half the Sky. And this is a phrase used by Mao Zedong, which was said, women hold up half the sky. And he lived by that dictum. Women were a part of the Communist Party Central Committee. They were part of the workforce. And that was an extremely central part of the momentum that China had. And the World Bank, to you and I, would be a surprise, but made the bold prediction in 1981 that with its base of human capital, China stands to make progress, dynamic progress within a generation. In 1981, well before the Deng Xiaoping reforms had set in. So my main theme is human capital. Without sound human capital, economic development is not possible. And to Sadanand's question, who rightly asked, look, but we have made progress, and I acknowledge that. There's no question that we have made progress, but we are in a position where the rest of the world continues to move. And therefore, if we want to compete, and therefore, if we want to create jobs, we need to just do much better. On the question, has India done something right? Yes. So I repeatedly go back in the book to the state of Kerala. I start the Kerala story in 1957 with the onset of communist rule in Kerala. Kerala, the Communist Party is a misnomer. It is a social democratic party in the Western European sense. Paid huge attention to human capital right from the beginning, for which reason it got into a relatively good equilibrium on human capital. Kerala then subsequently also did more by way of land reforms. Kerala also now more recently has done well by way of decentralizing authority to local governments. And the decentralization of authority to local governments is particularly important for the last issue, which I keep harping back on, the erosion of social norms and accountability. How is that so? When there is a decentralized governance process, those who are governed are better able to hold the governing class to account. And it is that accountability and the norms it creates around it, which is central. So if I have to have a wish, and this is the wish I leave the book with, that the decentralized governance, which leads to greater accountability, spreads further within the country and then percolates, and its virtues percolate up through the system. And that is my hope, not just for Kerala and for the rest of the country, but I would say more broadly for humanity. I see a question in the chat box where Kavita Iyer is asking the question, doesn't the Western media have a responsibility also in dealing with some of these questions more frontally? And I agree with her that we need to be asking the question, how can we tell the true success story of India, which is in a system where human development, decentralized governance is more prominent, rather than telling a superficially glossy story that is likely to crack without the foundations being laid properly.
Not to put you on the spot, Sadanand, but since you write regularly in the for Western media, do you want to respond to this one, or how you see it?
Yeah, my sense of the question was that, if I interpret it correctly, is that, why is it not more of a scandal that the government of India seems to be going after the international media? They had this sort of pretty in-your-face so-called tax raids on the BBC shortly after that two-part documentary that examined the career and policies of the Prime Minister. So the short answer is that I think the Western media, in fact, is quite critical of the government of India when it comes to things like freedom of the press, civil liberties, the rights of religious minorities. I think all of these issues are covered in great detail, and in fact, the government is is regularly quite upset about it. I think the second, it isn't clear, however, whether what the Western media says about these things has much of an impact in India.
That is correct.
I think the dominant narrative in India, and I think actually this is a sort of, this is, coming back to questions of culture, this may be a bit of a sort of national trait. I think Indians have a great capacity to ignore bad news coming from overseas and dismiss it as being some part of an agenda, So you have, for example, you saw the foreign minister's recent comments on George Soros. Basically, you have very large chunks, as far as I can tell, very large chunks of the educated Indian middle class and elites who genuinely believe that there is some kind of plot afoot to keep India down and people are just jealous. And therefore, that's why all these, bad news stories are all just because, the West is scared of losing its preeminence and India is rising and so on. Now, we can sort of, we can mock that, but I think that's the wrong response. We have to understand and take it seriously because that really is what many people seem to believe. And I think this is not something, I'll end on this note, this is not something new. I've been very critical myself of the Mody government. But, if you go back, for example, and look at the emergency period under Indira Gandhi, basically, I don't think Indians were really in a position to assess what Indira Gandhi did and the damage she did both to the economy and to the democratic polity until probably the 1990s. So that kind of real-time mechanism that we expect to have working in a democracy, whereas that, politicians make mistakes, journalists and intellectuals step up right away and criticize those mistakes, and then corrections are made. I think in India, that mechanism seems to work with an extreme time lag. So we're going to really have the most honest discussions about the Mody era, not now. We're probably going to have those discussions, in 2035 or something, where there's less of a kind of fear, less euphoria, less emotion attached to it. And for the moment, I would say that a large proportion of educated Indians, along with a large proportion of India watchers, particularly on the business side, right, investment banks and so on, they believe what they want to believe. And what they want to believe is not that India is broken, but that India is very much in one piece and is about to take off.
So thanks everyone. This is very exciting today. A bit gloomy. We'll see, as Sadan was saying, we'll see in 10 years where India is going to be. We're gonna have our next Envisioning India event, I think, on April 12, and there's going to be another one on April 20. The one on April 20 would be the discussion of a book by Ganesh Natarajan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this well, and Ejaz Ghani, my former colleague from the World Bank. So we'll send emails very soon. So thanks all. This was great today. Thanks Sadanand, and thanks Professor Mody for discussing your work, and Sadanand for providing the comments. Thanks, and thanks everyone for attending as well. Thank you.